So I guess the first question is just off the top of your head, kind of. I know wolves are nocturnal. So what does their like typical evening look like?
Typically, probably right at the crepuscular period, just when it starts to get dark, is when they typically leave to do their hunting. And that's also the period when deer are most active. And as you get into the nighttime, beaver will be more active. So those are their prime species that they're hunting. And so they're going to be getting active at the time it starts to get dark, and they'll be hunting probably throughout the night or until they're successful, or some nights they're not successful and they end up coming back sometime late in the evening or late in the night back to their rendezvous site in the summertime where they're holding their pups.
That's great. Um, do you know? So the first thing it does is hunt. So they hunt all night.
Much
If
of the
they're
night,
not
yes.
successful, I guess until they're successful. Is that what happens?
Sometimes they're not successful and they just end up coming back to the rendezvous site, their rest site, to spend the day just resting there until they try again the next evening.
Interesting. And then, can you talk about when they're if they're successful early on? Do they just go back to the rendezvous site? Do they keep
Probably they're
going?
going
How
to,
do they?
if they're successful, they're going to eat as much as possible and then bring that back to the rendezvous site and regurgitate it for the pups or and sometimes other adults that may be back at the rendezvous site. Typically, by the midsummer period, all of the adults and the yearlings will be hunting, and the pups will be staying behind. Occasionally, there might be like a babysitter that stays behind, and they would then be fed too by those wolves that are off doing the hunting. Smaller packs, it tends to be all of the adults are going to hunt, and larger packs, there may be one or two that just kind of hang out with the pups and hope somebody comes along and feeds them. And they don't have to bother to hunt themselves.
That's so interesting. So in July, how old are the pups usually, or what does an
Well,
average pack look like?
yeah, so they would have been born probably between about the 1st and the 15th of April. So is May, June, July, so about 4 months old. And they're going to be about 15, 20 pounds. Some of the bigger ones may be a little over 20 pounds. So they're only about a third or a quarter of their adult size. They're going to continue to grow throughout the summertime.
Wow. And how many pups would you say? Or actually, first, can you talk about the size of an average pack here in Wisconsin, and then how many pups would you say a pack probably has at this
Sure,
point?
the average pack in Wisconsin in midwinter usually is only about 4 wolves, and they typically, on the average, have about 5 or 6 pups born in April. So that normally will double the size of the average pack for a short period of time. But the mortality rate on pups can be relatively high, and typically only about a third survive to the end of their first year. So of those 5 pups born in the springtime, one or two might still be alive by that next year. That's why we'll have a count of 4 wolves at in the wintertime. And so they're going to be using their den site from usually about late March until uh, end of May, early June, and then they move to rendezvous sites. And the rendezvous sites will be used from June until the end of September into early October. And there will be 2 or 3 to maybe as many as 9 or 10 different rendezvous sites, depending on situations and circumstances. Sometimes, if there's a kill made, they'll move their pups to a new rendezvous site so they can more easily feed on the kill. Most of the time, they just bring the kill parts back with them, either carrying some parts of the animal or in their stomach, basically, to regurgitate it. But then they also will move the pups around if as berry crops become available, because by July and August, as raspberries, blueberries start to get ripe, the pups and the adults will feed on those as well. And it becomes an important kind of secondary food source for them when they're having a little bit less success hunting. Earlier in the summer, late spring, there's going to be a lot of fawns on the landscape, and they're relatively easy to catch. And so they do focus on fawns. But by the time the fawns are a couple of months old, they're pretty fast, they're harder to catch. The adults are going to be in better condition. So that can be a kind of a stressful time for wolves to hunt. They'll still hunt some beaver, but the beaver aren't spending as much time on land until later in the summer or early fall when they're starting to gather food for their winter catch. So hunting becomes somewhat stressful, and there probably are many days they go out to search for animals to hunt, and and end up coming back empty-handed or empty-stomached.
Wow. Well, first, can you just explain what a rendezvous site is?
Sure. So the rendezvous sites are the sites they use as their home sites where they keep the pups after the pups are big enough to be outside of the den. And so they're the first few rendezvous sites are usually not too far from the den area, and sometimes they are just the areas near the den, adjacent to the den. But they're usually more open areas, places where the pups can romp about. Often even beaver meadows are favorite spots for rendezvous sites. Both in part they have good water, they've got drinking water nearby. Beaver ponds often are fringed by dense cover like alders or fir and spruce trees, so good escape cover as well as shade. And those beaver meadows are great places for meadow voles to romp about, and that becomes one of the first things the pups learn to hunt is hunting the meadow voles in the meadow. So it gives them small snacks to feed on while they're waiting for the adults to come back to feed them more substantial meals.
Do you know more about how the pups learn to hunt? That sounds like a straight out of Lion King or something.
Well, in part, it's probably following adults around when they're big enough to follow the adults around, and they're not really that big enough for that until September or into October. And then it's probably just a matter of traveling around with the adults and coming in after a kill, sometimes maybe being part of a chase on a kill. They see the adults doing the killing, and through that process, they learn to hunt themselves. But they're usually a year or more old before they're proficient in killing adult deer-sized animals. So while they'll do some hunting for small rodents and perhaps make some of the last bites in a kill that's mostly completed by the adults during a chase, but they're killing by themselves. Probably they'll need to be a year or more old, which sort of relates to when they're ready to disperse from a pack, which is usually when they're more than a year old, because then they can hunt for themselves. Whereas when they're less than a year old, they are more dependent on the adults and the yearlings in the pack to help them make the kills.
It sounds like then when they hear a howl, they can't, at least the pups can't distinguish whether that's a wolf in their pack or a different wolf, but the adults can. Is that right?
That's probably true. Wolves probably are able to determine just by the howl alone who is howling at them. And if it's a strange wolf that's not part of their pack, they're probably telling that wolf, you're in an occupied area, please leave. And so, yeah, they are responding to that as a strange wolf that's visiting or potentially invading their territory.
How far out do they usually go when they go hunting? I imagine as far as they need to, but what's the furthest they'll go before they head back?
Well, their territories are typically 40 to maybe 100 square miles in Wisconsin, so they can cover any part of that territory. So if you look at that, that's an 8 by 8 or 10 by 10 square mile area, and they can visit any parts of that territory during the night. And in the process of the night traveling, it can be 10 to 20 miles that they're traveling in their routes, searching for potential prey and patrolling their territory. So it could be quite a few miles. Our territories tend to be small compared to places like Alaska or even Yellowstone, or especially like the Arctic regions, where their territories can be several hundred square miles or as much as 1,000 square miles in places like the Arctic. So then they may have to travel some fairly long distance because the prey is at much lower density, it's much more spread out. So to find enough food, they have to cover a lot more ground.
Is that why ours are smaller? There's more available?
We got a very dense deer population, although a lot of the hunters don't think that we do, but compared to caribou in the Arctic regions or muskox, ours are at very high density.
You were saying earlier, I didn't know this, that the pack members, even if they're not the parents of the pups, will still regurgitate and feed the pups. Is that right?
That's true. All pack members will assist with raising the pups. And there's been research that shows that having helpers, those subordinate wolves that aren't the adult pair, that enhances the survival of pups in packs. So the more helpers you have, the better survival. The more wolves are helping feed those pups, and that becomes stressful during the summertime, and sometimes it's harder to get enough food. And starvation, unfortunately, is one of the common causes of mortality for those pups if the pack just can't hunt enough prey to feed the pups.
Can you, to the extent you know, which senses they rely on at night? It's,
well, obviously hearing, because they can hear very long distances. Sense of smell. There's evidence that they can smell a mile or more away. They can hear each other probably 6 miles away. So that covers an area of a circled area that's about 115 square miles. So they can hear well within that area if other wolves are howling to them. So the sense of smell, sense of hearing are very important. But when they're getting close to an actual kill, their eyesight will be important as well. Their eyesight's just a little bit better than ours. They're not a great deal better, but they're better for seeing in the dark. They have more rods and less cones, so they're better able to see in the dark than we are, and that's going to be critical for catching animals in the dark.
I think you covered a lot. I think the last question is just a fun one. It's, what's the coolest thing you've seen a wolf do at night?
I think maybe the coolest, I don't know if it's so much what they did, is being able to hear a full chorus of wolves where there's adults and pups howling away while you're also seeing the northern lights off in the distance. And that just, I've had only a few times I've been able to see that, but that's just that's magical almost.
That is great. Actually, I know you're not doing the Howling Weekend this year.
So I will be doing one with the Natural Resource Foundation the 1st of August. But we aren't having our regular Timberwolf Alliance workshop this summer, but we do hope to do that again in the future. And yeah, I enjoy taking people out on wolf howls. And I think often one of the things that people get most amazed by outside, if they get to hear wolves, we don't always hear wolves. It's maybe about half the time out. But I think just seeing the northern sky with almost no lights in the background is just, people don't get to see that often. I live here, so I forget that sometimes, but just being able to get out and see the stars and seeing the Milky Way and getting beautiful views of the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, the various other constellations. It's just, people just get amazed just seeing the sky.
Yeah, it is. The one I went was amazing. I plan to keep going back, so I hope you do bring them back.
Yep.
And you learn so much through the weekend.
Yep. Well, we're certainly hoping to plan doing that again.